Well, welcome to another Kids at Home conversation from Kids at Heart International. And today we'll be focusing on how God can use the spiritual practice of solitude to transform us and the children we care for. So today's conversation is called Just Him and Me. And I'm Gordon West. My co-host today is...
I'm Adam Ormord, and I'm really glad to be here with you today, Gordon. Thank you.
I'm glad you're back. Usually Adam's behind the scenes telling us what we should be doing, and today he's kind of filling both roles, but he's normally
if I'm talking on this end, that means get ready for a long conversation.
That's
folks.
right, because there's no one telling us to stop talking and move on. But Adam's also the Chief Program Officer for Kids at Heart and kind of oversees, the bulk of our staff and lots of the things we do. But Adam and I are delighted today to welcome our very special guest, Lacy Borgo, to join us in this conversation. Lacy is a multi-talented, very busy lady. She's a spiritual director, a professor. She's a mother and a wife. Those aren't the smallest of the chores, and they aren't chores, I know, but she also teaches and provides training for spiritual directors, and she's written some of the best materials out there for children and spiritual formation. She's the author of Good Dirt, and her newest book, you got to pick it up, Spiritual Conversations with Children, Listening to God Together. Both of those are available at Amazon and IVP. So get yourself a copy. You will want them. And you'll also find a lot of great resources at her website, Good Dirt Ministry. Lacy, is that .com or .org?
It's .org.
.org. I should have known that. GoodDirtMinistry.org. Mm-hmm. Okay, and a little later, we're going to be talking about the curriculum she's written, and she has a special offer, so you'll want to pay attention to that. Lacy, welcome, and we hope you're doing well this morning in your home in Colorado on the Western Slopes.
Yes, thank you. We are doing well, and just to be absolutely honest, yes, sometimes wifing and mothering is a chore. It's also a delight, and it's a chore. They don't cancel out each other, but yes, I'm a mom and a spouse and a teacher and a beloved child of God.
Yes.
And well put. And we do the chore part out of the love of the other part. But,
we do.
but they and you're right, they're parallel truths. They're not exclusive truths. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, as we get our conversation started in this direction of solitude, Lacy, I just want to take a moment and invite you and those who are listening right now just to play a mental movie in your mind of just a one-on-one time that you remember having with a favorite person in your childhood, in your life. Maybe it's a day that you remember fishing with your grandfather, or maybe you were going to the circus with your mom, or a dress-up date with your dad. Can you think of any of those times that were just like, they were just me times, just times that you had with that person that were so special?
Yeah, my grandparents owned a deli on the sort of industrial side of town in Odessa, Texas, which is all oil filled, and it's just West Texas, gritty. And I would go as young as I can remember, up to about age 5, I would help them and work in that deli with them. And there was a blind man named Blondie Duncan, and he would come in pretty much every day at the same time. And I realized as an adult reflecting on it, I thought, who drove him? But that didn't matter when I was little. I just remember his white cane and him coming in. And I had prepared for this. I was so excited every day to meet with him. And I would make us both a pimento cheese sandwich. So that's like a thing in Texas, pimento cheese. And I would make him one and me one, and we would drink a Dr. Pepper together. He would share his Dr. Pepper with me, which was really special. And I would just sit on his lap. I remember no conversations. I just remember his presence. And there was expectation and delight. And we were just together, eating a pimento cheese sandwich, drinking a Dr. Pepper. And I don't think he mustn't have stayed very long. And then he left, and I knew it would happen again the next day. And I just felt very safe and welcomed and appreciated. and even shared, sustenance, the blessed Dr. Pepper, in that space. And that really memory has stayed with me.
I have to think that if we asked Whitey, he'd go back to the same experience as his memory of a person he had special time with. So that's a great story. I know for me, my aunt and uncle were very special. And when my uncle passed away, I had never tried to articulate what was so special about them. But when my uncle passed away at his memorial, my big brother, I remember him saying, Fred and Beth just always had time for us. And it was like, yes, that was the prevailing thing. They didn't, their son was off, wasn't around. And so it wasn't for him, but like they had a boat, and under the table, they always had board games there. And we knew they were just for us. So, if we showed up, it's like, okay, what do you want to play? And yeah, you just felt like you weren't an imposition. It was, they enjoyed having you present and enjoyed you. Yeah. So that was very special. So,
well, if I can just say, I love that language. You weren't an imposition.
Yeah.
Right.
That's just such an important piece for all of us in our formation, that we know we are not impositions.
Yes. Let's talk about how you guys got into this. How, maybe all three of us, how did God help you come to view solitude as a Christian practice for formation? I mean, rather than just being alone.
I think for me, it was meeting God in the mountains. One of my first memorable experiences of God was I was about 5 years old. It was the early 70s, so parents didn't keep up with their kids as well as they do nowadays. And we were in the LaSalle Mountains in Utah. And I had wandered into a grove of aspen trees in the fall. And I remember just being totally captivated by their glittering golden, orbs in the sun. And the earth was super spongy. So I just laid down on my back just to and I had this moment where I just woke up to the understanding that I wasn't alone and that God was with me, that solitude wasn't really about being alone, and that there was an awakening to God's presence. And I've carried that with me. Anytime that I'm in nature really calls me to solitude and to be attentive to God's presence.
I have to say, aspen trees in the fall, it would be a pretty good way to experience that.
Yeah, beauty does that for us.
I grew up a pretty quiet kid, pretty in my head. So I could be alone pretty easily and pretty introspective. But I don't think I made a connection that actually I wasn't alone, that actually I was with the creator of the universe, and that God wanted to be with me in those times. I think that came much later. Unfortunately, it came after a pretty hard season of ministry, and kind of out of necessity. And it was, I lived in Colorado Springs, and I was up in Divide, Colorado, at a retreat center, and was blessed to be able to work with the people at that organization there, Potter's Inn. And it just kind of started slowly, that I was being more and more invited into times of solitude. I remember they had a prayer bench on a prayer trail, and each bench had a different name and a different theme. And they, after a time of spiritual direction, they would invite me to go to a particular bench and maybe sit there and kind of use the theme of that bench to meet with God. And I remember thinking, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to go sit at this bench and I'm alone, but I'm supposed to have a conversation with Jesus. And that was 2010, so a good 10 years ago. And it just, that was an entry point into a whole new way of being with God in solitude. And one of the things I would say is the most beautiful about solitude for me since then is that when I am out in nature, and when I am in usually like a different place, a new place, a place I haven't been before, a new trail, or I'm looking at something for the first time, this song, Great is Thy Faithfulness, suddenly comes to my mind, and I have to sing it in these places. And I just have to like recognize, God, you got me here, and you're here with me in this place right now. And it's so good to be with you. And so I would say it really just in the last 10 years I'm almost 50. So, 20% of my life, I think I'm in this transforming process now, and I'm starting to understand more and more about solitude and how important it is.
I think my experience was about 2010 also. And I was actually at a Ruth Haley Barton weekend retreat, and she spoke through the evening about the first evening, how the next day we would be out for 4 hours of solitude and silence. And I started panicking a little bit because I was not people who know me might be surprised, but I wasn't the real quiet child that was all in my head and alone. So the next morning, between the first two sessions, we're getting ready for lunch and going out on our own. I remember going to Ruth Barton just in a panic, saying, what if I go out there and God doesn't show up? And I look back and realize I was at a faith crisis. And I just knew the leader of this weekend has written a book and everything, could give me the 3 steps to take if he doesn't show up. And her response was, well, what's your alternative? And I'm like, that's not helpful. So I went out for the 4 hours, and it's a long story because just about every 20 minutes through that time, God miraculously showed up. I'd never seen anything like that. And it was a day everything changed. I came home to my wife and said, I've been a Christian at this point for 40 years probably. But did I just become one? Because the substance of that relationship was so different. It messed with I went to seminary, so I can use this word. It messed with my soteriology, because all of a sudden I'm thinking, wow, I've talked about a relationship with Jesus all my life. This is what I was talking about, but I had never experienced it before. So it's quite amazing, but it took, kind of walking the plank and having God be faithful in the end. But
I appreciate the distinction that you both make between being alone and where our attention is.
Yes.
In solitude, it is about being alone, but it is also about where our attention is. And it's such a wonderful thing about children is that they actually do pay attention. I mean, they pay attention not to what we tell them to often, but they pay attention to what is right in front of them. If you go take a walk with a young child, you will absolutely be attentive to ants and rocks and trees because they are. So children are uniquely ready, aware, and capable of practicing that attention, that inner attention to God's presence.
Well, and Lacy, I believe, but I'd love to hear your opinion on if you think I'm on the right track. I believe some of that, first of all, I know you'd agree, we discount children thinking they can't do this when in reality they do it better. But I believe part of how they do some of these things better is because they're concrete thinkers. So when God captures their attention, God's got their attention. When God captures our attention, we have 7 other things spinning in our heads, and it's easy and so I appreciate the way you explained it too, as you say, the attention, because in subsequent retreats, I did about 5 years with Ruth Barton each quarter. And there were times that our 4 hours of solitude and silence, I realized took me about 3 hours and 45 minutes to settle down. And that was all about me. But I always knew at least the last 5 would be really rich. But there were just seasons of my life that I came in, and there's just a lot of busyness going on in me and a lot of focus on things that are not God. And so the aloneness, the stillness and the aloneness for me anyway, and I think this is probably universal, is first about just getting prepared, and then about being with God. There's a almost like a detoxing from the world and the busyness, and then we can have some significant time with God.
How would you take a child through this idea of solitude? I mean, as a spiritual practice, would you invite them into that? And what would you say? And what kind of language would you use?
Thank you. My sort of definition of solitude is quiet, alone time with God.
Okay.
And when I sit with children that I don't know what their church background is, and I don't know what their pattern of attachment is, so I'll talk a little bit about that in just a sec. I tend to move away from gender language, like him, using him, because I think about Dallas's vision, intention, and means. So as a reliable pattern of transformation, Dallas talks about that in Renovation of the Heart. And solitude must be entered into with desire and hunger.
Yes.
So to just say do solitude or do simplicity or do whatever, we move into legalism. And that was a big sort of, that's a big danger with the disciplines, especially with children, because it can so easily become things we want you to do or a moral lesson.
Yeah.
And the disciplines are not that. The disciplines are contact points. They are contact points with God. And
let's repeat, because that was so rich. So they have to be entered into with desire and hunger. Desire and hunger. And so what we're doing is cultivating desire and hunger. And the way that we do that is through attachment. So I don't know if you know much about attachment theory, about how important it is that children early, young on, attach to an adult, or ideally mom or dad, or mom and dad, and those attachments switch throughout their lives. But our early pictures of God are formed through those attachments. So if a child has an abusive father, and then we invite them to go be with, and we use a pronoun him, God, they will not want to go into solitude with this person because it is dangerous. Does that make sense? Yes. And of course, they don't think about this. It's an automatic response.
That's right. They're not reflecting on it. They're just trying to survive. And truly, God has given them those wonderful survival techniques to protect them. And so when we think about inviting them into solitude, I say quiet alone time with God. And I use just God so that it encompasses and it doesn't get in the way. And then we create sort of vision by being with children as they are experiencing solitude. So they attach to us, and in that way they attach to God. And a great example would be mom and dad go out in your lawn, lay in the grass with your child and look at the clouds. And then invite some reflection. What do you see as you look at the clouds? And see, you are in solitude, but you're together. But you are internally in solitude. You listen to what they say about the clouds, and then maybe you say, what do you think God is saying to you in the clouds? And see, they don't have to tell you, or they can, but it is a reflective sort of that recognize and respond to God's presence. So you are training them or modeling what solitude looks like. You're telling them it's safe. You're helping them have this sort of generous vision, invitation. You are dropping hunger for them. And the same can be said when you go take, Richard Foster is sort of quoted as saying, nature is where what God wants done gets done. So go there. So taking nature walks with your kids, even just walking around the block or your house or your backyard right now, and noticing those places creates this desire and hunger. And if children sort of aren't attached or have a super strong attachment, and that attachment fluctuates throughout life, as teenagers, it's this huge dance between attachment and detachment, and woo. I have 2 teenagers. I'm on that roller coaster. Send Dramamine if you can. But that dance with attachment is what helps them know that God is safe and helps them to want to go be in solitude with God.
Well, you know, some of us as adults, I'm sure, are going to think about this solitude thing and think, like you say, the roller coaster of parenting. It's like, oh my goodness, my child never sits still. You know, my little girl's never quiet. My little boy never stops moving. And thinking that children can't do this, and even thinking that maybe that absolute silence and absolute stillness is required. Those are a couple, to me, that are the misconceptions of all of this practice. What are some other things that you find where we as the adults in kids' lives have misconceptions or even bad practices, which we may have to deal with as we introduce children in our own minds, our own hearts, as well as the way we explain it with them? What are the things to look out for, watch out for?
Well, I think for children, one thing to watch out for is that children, all the dimensions of their self, their body, their mind, their social context, which is a dimension of their self, all of theirs are integrated into one, meaning that however they feel, their body does it. So, for example, when my children were little and we were in the checkout line at Target, and there was something low, like a candy low, and they wanted it, and they would lay on the floor and cry in deep and terrible anguish if I said no to this thing. And because all the dimensions of their self are in sync.
My children actually never did that, but I've seen it.
You have good. Thank you for witnessing our struggle.
Yes,
public struggle.
And praying for others. Yes.
Please do. But as an adult, part of adulthood is that we split the self, and we have to survive. So inside, I'm absolutely shamed and horrified at what's happened, right? What's happening. But my face is going, it's okay, honey. Let's just get up off the floor, please. Right? In my most sing-songy voice, right? So I have split the self. And a later conversation might be that the self comes back together as we mature. It's a beautiful thing, such a beautiful journey. And it moves from innocence of childhood to character as the dimensions come back together. But for a child, what that means that they will practice their life with God with every dimension of their self. They are not disembodied heads. Saying a creed, no dice there, because their whole body matters. Their thoughts, their feelings, their body, how they relate to attachment, which is social context, all of that they will bring into solitude. So they won't sit, they can sit. Usually the general rule is we can be expected for children to sit in silence and can sit still, and this is a generality, 1 minute for every year that they are. So that's wonderful research to come out of Ireland on children in meditation. So that's sort of the general rule, and we can help them learn that. But there's also another way that says get their body in on the solitude. Go and take a walk, and invite them that when they're playing with Legos to talk with God, and that would be, if they're playing by themselves, to talk with God about what they're doing. And then they've got their body, their mind, their thoughts, their feelings in on the play that they're doing. And
they're also learning to be with God in the midst of whatever they're doing, because play is such a normal everyday thing. So they're practicing normal everyday life with God in the midst of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to be a child again? I mean, some of that being wholly integrated is just a wonderful picture that we could just, love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That would be good.
And what a gift and grace of God that as we mature and do our work, it does happen. It comes back together.
I think some people have the misconception of, especially in our society today, but many societies, many cultures around the world, of that a solitude and solitude and silence practice is a waste of time. And of course, I think everything we've talked about today would say that's not true. But for me, as a recovering drivenness maniac, I kind of like talking about solitude with God, time alone with God, as wasting time with God. Because and when I say it to myself, it's like, oh, okay, this kind of feels like wasting time. But when I say I'm wasting time with God, I know I have permission to waste time, which is its own grace to me. I don't need to be busy right now. I can feel this, and yet it's really a gift from God not to be driven for the next 10 minutes or for the next 4 hours or whatever time He allows. So
I love how you bring in time to this, because that is one of the ways that children are gifted in solitude. Generally, children have no care of time. So they will stay attentive to whatever has, you use the language captured. I love that. Yeah. I think, Adam, you did. Whatever has captured their attention for as long as it captures their attention. And God infinitely captures people's attention.
Exactly, Lacy. And the 1 minute, I'm fascinated that you mentioned the study from Ireland, because educators, of course, have said 1 minute of attention span per year of age for years. But one of the things we always like to point out is that as we've kind of moved children's ministry and some of our parenting into an entertainment based, it's really hard to keep kids entertained for a long time. That's ask a 14-year-old babysitter how hard that is. That's you're earning your pay when you're trying to entertain kids for a few hours.
Have you been listening to the lament of my children? Yes, go ahead.
Well, I raised 2 daughters to successful adulthood, so I've been there, done that, seen it. But I like to say, kids don't, first of all, the church is not going to entertain better than the world, so give up. But we can engage children better than the world, because we've got God, the most engaging force of all. And yeah, when kids can stare at a bug for 17 hours.
They absolutely can, especially if you need them to get their shoes on and go
exactly.
to the park.
Yes.
I recently gave a little talk at a youth and children's conference, and I was trying to think how can I bring, and I had like 1 minute to give like a really short little talk, so I stood up and I held up my cell phone, and I said, and this happened in Texas, so you'll forgive a bit of the weaponry language, but I said, if you are seeking to entertain children or teens with this instrument, you are sadly outgunned. You cannot beat this. If you are seeking to inform and give information, you're done here. This has more information in it than anything you can offer.
Exactly.
But if you will put as your top priority, and it's not that information or entertainment can't be a part of the mix. Absolutely, don't let it be one.
Right.
But if you will seek and put all of your resources into encounter, and this is a word by Trevor Hudson, South African pastor, encounter with God, which is what solitude is, encounter. Time after time in the New Testament, Jesus goes away, goes away, goes away. He goes away for encounter with God, intimate encounter with God. No one else can do encounter like the God of the universe.
I talked to you about that first 4 hours that I was aware of God. And I really could tell you absolutely every step of that time, because He did it, and I was more clueless than any child. So children can do this because it was God that did. I had no idea. My contribution was in fear and trembling, going out and doing it. But every step of when God showed up, and I told you it was about every 20 minutes. I really think it's because God knew I just needed 20 minutes to recover and to think through what just happened and process before I had another encounter. And and you're right. Kids can get it. And in fact, they expect to. They aren't like us sitting back doubting. They do have the faith of a child. Oh, okay, we're going to go meet with God. Okay, let's go.
The expectation is there. But I also appreciate you bringing up your experience, because one of the ways that we help children, we were talking about sort of fanning that flame of desire and want, is for us to do it. They need to see the adults in their life doing it. And that means that we have to do the hard work you're talking about. That we've got, I'm almost 52, Adam. I'm just nearly there as well. And so we have 50 years of baggage and, a poorly made picture of God. We all get a little bit of that, and we all have to be working on it throughout our lives.
This whole Kids at Home series, and actually everything Kids at Heart does, because we minister to church and home, but we talk about Deuteronomy 6 is sometimes sadly relegated or overly focused on a nuclear family. I like to say, let me tell you what Deuteronomy 6 says. All of the big people in a child's life need to be falling in love with Jesus and purposefully talking about it with all of the little people in the room. And if we're all together doing this, that's what kids need. And yes, they need to hear you talk about it. That there's nothing more transformative for a child than for you to talk about your experience with a discipline, a practice, and say, yeah, this one's kind of hard for me, but boy, it's really meaningful, or whatever. Or it doesn't.
Yeah, just to say, I meet God. You don't even have to use the language, but I meet God when I'm by myself, and not even to say it, but for them to see you do it.
Yeah.
When you're walking, taking a walk outside, when you're laying in the yard looking at clouds, when you're cooking dinner and you're looking at the beautiful, right now it's peach season in Colorado, and when you taste a peach and you say, oh, can you just taste that on your tongue running down your throat?
Oh, Lacy, I wish you wouldn't have mentioned that, because I was just at the grocery store and I bought 4 peaches and somehow they didn't get home with me.
Oh, well, you know what? There's no time like the present.
Yeah.
That's definitely the sacrament of the present moment.
Got to go get some more.
Yeah.
But
in those moments, and just inviting God into it, remembering always that the disciplines are at the service of our relationship with God. They are at the service. They never are the end mark. Connection, and that's why it's so important that we almost don't worry too much about how we do them, because perfection is second to connection.
Yes,
good.
Just that we are, and we're naming that connection. Like when I suck my teeth into this peach, I just had to stop a minute and say to God, thank you. This is so delicious. And it's just running down your face and wonderful. And what you do when you give language to it and you put it out there is you tell children it's true and it's possible.
Yes.
And there's that hunger, fanning that hunger flame.
Well, I'm just sitting here, Lacy, thinking about your definition again of solitude. Quiet, alone time with God, right? That's it. 5 words. And I feel like every one of those words is intentionally chosen and speaks specifically about, what we're getting at here. And time, we talked about time. Yeah. We have to understand this pace of life that we are in. I was talking about Potter's Inn earlier. How many leaders in ministry get to a place like that after burnout?
Yeah.
Instead of before.
Yeah.
And most of their stories are the same. You're asking me to go do what? Go do nothing?
Yeah.
And there's this idea of we are wasting time.
Yeah.
And we're too we're too focused and programmed to produce. Well done, my good and faithful servant. That's what we all want to hear, right? And yet you talk about encounter. And that's a different thing here. In fact, it's really more, this is my beloved. You are my beloved, and you I'm well pleased. And that's what I think we're trying to help move adults and children into this place where we can get past the productive life for God.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, Adam, what you're saying is so important, because if we're not able to slow down and realize that just being with God is of great value, I can guarantee you, as an older parent, you're not slowing down enough just to be with your kids to show them they're of value.
Mm.
And so we're actually creating that, we're reinforcing that busyness that never slows down for relationship with God or one another. And so,
and we've already talked. Sorry, go ahead, Lacy.
I think this all goes back to what we believe about God and God's kingdom, if I can say. In a generous kingdom, if we truly believe, and maybe this means we have to go back and ask these hard questions of ourselves in the presence of the Spirit. If we truly believe that God's kingdom is generous and good, there's plenty of time.
yes.
But if we are struggling, and can I tell you, the church, everyone struggles with time is scarcity. We say time is money. We're on short time. We have a scarce view of time. But in God's kingdom, time is generous. There's plenty of time for everything. There's time for us to get it wrong. There's time for us to get it back on the road. There's time for us to take 42,000 detours and return back. Everything in God's generous kingdom has time. And children, they don't articulate it, but they know it. That's why they're not in a hurry to get their shoes on. That's why they can. I have washed all the gravel in my driveway because my children put it in their pockets as infinite treasures that they found. And I washed
Don't you feel better driving on clean gravel?
It's so sparkly. You can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's probably the nicest place in town. So.
Absolutely. But it's this sense of, do we see time as being generous in God's kingdom, or is time scarce? And for children, it's generous. We learn that, or we become reprogrammed that time is scarce. So wasting time with God becomes absolutely, we could never do that because there's only so much.
And I think for me, there's an underlying tie to that I learned producing is how you get love. Right. And so, I can't stop producing. I need all the time I have to produce so that God would actually love me. And so I better be working for him. And for anyone listening that's in ministry, reflect on that, because it's a very common curse of those that make our living in ministry is like, well, we need to do it full time so that God will really, really love us. And we don't think that, we don't articulate it, but deep down in, there's a piece of that very commonly in our soul. And so we never get to stop and just enjoy them. Yes, that'd be wonderful.
Cycle of Grace by Trevor Hudson.
Okay.
There are some YouTube videos, and there's also a book. So if you're struggling with the way that you feel belonged or loved as coming from your vocation or from your relationship with God rather than just this generous acceptance, Trevor has done a great job in his book, Cycle of Grace.
Thank you. And once again, this is what we try to tell people is the big people need to be working on this first and then sharing with the little people. So any parent, any church leader would do well reading that book. Thank you, Lacy.
Yeah. Yep. And isn't it, can I just say, as a parent and a still learner in God's kingdom, that I don't have to have it all figured out before I can accompany my children. That's right. Phew, because I'm still learning over and over and over and over again.
And sometimes those that have it all figured out are harder to learn from, because my late wife Becky she got a long-term substitute contract once. They thought she was a math teacher and she wasn't, but they hired her, and then they said, oh well, we'll keep you anyway. And she got rave reviews, and she said, I think it's because I'm just figuring out the math myself, so I know how to explain it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I just learned this, kids. Here's how you do this.
Well, that's the beauty of the idea of spiritual formation too, Gordon, is that this is a lifelong process.
Yes,
we're all in process.
It's a journey. And I think that process is the same as Lacy was talking about, that time is just fine. God is not in a hurry with us.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, process and learning things. And, oh, yeah, I used to think that. Silly me. That's not true. I found out now. So, well, so I would love to hear from both of you. What would you say to leaders and parents about the necessity of nurturing this practice in the lives of children? How will it benefit them? Why should we do this?
Lacy, I'm just thinking about the name of your ministry, Good Dirt. And I feel like that's all leading to this idea. I mean, you talk about Texas, the soil, and you think about even where you are. I think you're really into nature and planting and, getting your hands in the soil. I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about even why you chose that language for your ministry, because I feel like this is one of the benefits.
But before you do, since my state was left out of this, and you mentioned both of your states, Arizona, while not having good dirt necessarily, has wonderful creation, just
absolutely
very different.
Oh, you have to have a particular kind of dirt to grow.
That's right.
Your
Special
beautiful
dirt.
Cactus.
Special dirt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I get $1 from the Chamber of Commerce here.
Well, we should mention it again then.
Yes. Arizona. Okay.
Right. Well, I think about because dirt is so nurturing, and it has to do, even in Arizona, maybe especially in Arizona, particular dirt produces particular plants.
Yes.
And that's important. A beautiful saguaro cactus would not grow well where I live because the dirt is not good. So I think of the spiritual practices as being a trellis upon which to grow. And this work that we're doing around what do we believe about God? What is our picture of God? That's amending the soil. The discipline of confession, telling our children that we're sorry when we really run it off into the ditch. And that helps amend the soil. That's fertilizer. Right. That's the good stuff that we're putting in it. When we teach them to pray, oh, that is water on the land. When we pray with them, that's, springtime during monsoon season. Those kinds of things. And really the good dirt, living closer to the earth has really taught me too that there are seasons in life.
Yes.
So moms and dads, you may be in a dry season, and it may be an incredible act of faith for you to lay out in the grass and talk about God with your children. And even in dry seasons, being present to your children, there is not one drop of rain that is not good, even one drop. So allowing ourselves to live in whatever season we're in and still be faithful companions to our children.
As a lover of the saguaro cactus, I want to add one element to what you just explained. Not only does it take special dirt, but one of the things we learn here is it has to be at just the right elevation and just the right side of the mountain. So it's a very special location. And I know we talk on our staff a lot about all of our staff has a day of solitude and silence each month. And so oftentimes we'll talk about, what did you do? How did it go? And most people are doing something with nature. And many of us have that very special place. I have a place in Prescott, Arizona, which is in the northern part, where God so miraculously showed up for me that I've gone back to it. And it's a couple-hour drive to get there, so I can't do it very often. But I just think, yeah, God, this is a good place for you and me.
And what a beautiful representation of how God is willing to meet families, whatever they look like, extended family, whoever's there, whoever you call family. God doesn't seem, if I could say this, to get God's knickers in a twist about what your family looks like. God really wants to meet us and invite us into relationship and share that. I know lots of single parent families who feel some guilt around that. But God doesn't seem to be limited. Take a wander through the scriptures.
Yeah. That's a beautiful piece. We've all got baggage. We've all taken one of those 4,700 detours, but God's still with us, and he's our GPS in the middle of it. He just doesn't always share. It's just like Google Maps. Sometimes there's a little left unsaid, but we get there okay. Well, we would like to invite our listeners, if they'd like to know more on how, I mean, I can't imagine. There is more, unbelievably. Lacy has just given us so much richness here, but if you'd like to look at how to invite children in, we have a resource guide on our website at kidzatHome.org. And that's created for you to download. It's completely free of charge. Share it with other ministry leaders. Share it with parents, please, the big people in kids' lives. And then we also have a connection place on Facebook, Connecting Children with God Facebook pages. We'd love for you to come and ask questions and share your stories and share pictures. And there's somebody always monitoring that to help, and just a rich community. Now, we mentioned earlier that Lacy has written a curriculum, and many of you probably know about it, but those who don't need to, it's called Life with God. And you can get it at gooddirtministries.org. And Lacy, out of her great love for the Lord and the Lord's people.
Not a scarcity mentality, right?
Not a scarcity, yes, and not a scarcity mentality, is offering this absolutely for free during COVID-19.
Yeah.
So go to gooddirtministries.org and check it out. You will be impressed. We often get this question: is what curriculum can we use to bring transformation to kids? And this is one of the very few for you all to look at. Life with God at gooddirtministries.org. Lacy, it has been incredible to be with you. Thank you so much. You are I like the phrase you use. Now I forget. Is it you're a wonderful human? Yes. So thank you. And we would so like it if you would share a little piece of your book, Spiritual Conversations with Children Listening to God Together. You have a very special blessing in that. So if you could bless us out, that would be great. And following that, just want to remind people we will have a couple minutes of music playing, and it's just a great time for you to sit and reflect on this time and ask God to be with you. But Lacy, please close us if you would.
Oh, I would love to. Well, let's all just take a deep breath. We've just given you so much to think about and maybe stirred some memories in your mind, and the Spirit may be offering you invitations. So can I just invite you to take a deep breath, breathing in God's presence with you, surrounding you, God's generous presence. And then when you exhale, allow yourself to rest and relax into love's family, the Trinitarian community of love who holds you, who is generous with time, who will make sure that everything you need is within 3 feet of you. So just allow these words to wash over you, listening for the Spirit's invitation to you, and maybe God's whisper to your childhood you of love. May you experience children with a renewed heart. May you become increasingly aware of children and greet them in common places like the grocery store and the park. May your deepening sensitivity to childhood experiences change the way you think and live. May you encourage a child's life with God through listening to what is being spoken and also to what is being said. May your life become one of prayer for children as people who are on the margins of society. May you honor the God-given autonomy of children, taking special care not to manipulate or to smother them. May you be granted the awe-inspiring opportunity to witness a child's life with God. Amen.
Amen. This has been a blessed time, Lacy. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Please don't be a stranger.
So good to have a conversation with you.
You
So
too.
good.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners.